The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the mountain town of Hemlock in a shroud of white. It was a world hushed, where the only sounds were the creak of snow beneath boots and the distant howl of wind. Detective Alex Turner, a ghost in his own life, was the only disturbance. His breath, like smoke, hung in the frigid air as he examined the scene. A perfect, pristine expanse of snow marred by a cruel, crimson stain. At its center, a young woman lay, her face a mask of waxen pallor. There was no sign of struggle, no broken branches, no footprints leading away from the body. It was as if she'd simply materialized there, a frozen tableau of death. A chill, unrelated to the temperature, crept down Alex's spine. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. This wasn't a simple case of exposure. There was a darkness to this, a sinister undercurrent that pulsed beneath the serene surface of the snow. He knelt, the cold biting into his exposed skin. Her eyes, wide open, held a terror that was almost tangible. A terror that spoke of a fear far greater than the icy grip of death. The medical examiner, a man with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much, arrived bundled against the cold. His breath, like Alex's, hung in the air, a ghostly counterpoint to the stark reality of the scene. He knelt, his gloved hands gentle as he began his grim task. Alex watched, his mind racing. There was something off about this. It wasn't just the lack of obvious signs of foul play. It was the isolation, the perfect silence of the snow, the unnatural stillness of the victim. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for this moment. He pulled out his phone, the screen a harsh, blue contrast to the white world. No signal. Of course not. Hemlock was a place where the world ended, or so it felt. He was alone with the dead woman and the growing certainty that this was more than a simple tragedy. A flicker of memory surfaced. A case years ago. A young woman found in similar circumstances. A case he'd botched, a mistake that had haunted him ever since. Was this a cruel echo of the past, a chance for redemption, or something far more sinister? The medical examiner straightened, his face etched with a grim expression. No obvious signs of trauma, he said, his voice muffled by his scarf. Hypothermia, perhaps, but there's something off about this. Alex nodded, his gaze fixed on the victim. Something off. Something very, very wrong. And he was going to find out what it was. As the medical examiner continued his examination, Alex's mind wandered back to the night he'd stumbled upon the scene of his greatest professional failure. A young woman, same as this one, found in the snow, a mystery that had never been solved. The case had consumed him, then destroyed him. Now, here he was, drawn back into that world of shadows. He studied the victim's face again. There was an eerie serenity to it, a mask of peace that belied the violent end she'd met. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth expanse of snow, looking for any sign, any clue. Nothing. Just pristine white, broken only by the stark reality of death. A sound cut through the silence. Footsteps crunching in the snow. A figure emerged from the swirling white, a man wrapped in heavy winter gear. It was the local sheriff, a man named Quinn, his face etched with worry. Alex, Quinn breathed, his voice hoarse in the cold air. What the hell is going on here? Alex stood, the weight of the world seeming to press down on him. I don't know, Quinn, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. But I think we're about to find out. A cold dread settled over him. This wasn't just another case. It was a haunting from the past, a specter demanding to be confronted. And as he looked out at the desolate landscape, he knew he was the only one who could face it. The sheriff looked at him expectantly, and Alex realized he had to pull himself together. He couldn't let his personal demons interfere with the job at hand. He had to be the detective he once was, before the whiskey and the guilt had claimed him. He took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill his lungs. We need to start with the basics, Alex said, his voice firm. Time of death, any items missing, and a full background check on the victim. Quinn nodded, his eyes darting back to the body. I'll handle the locals, but we might need outside help for that background check. Someone, objective. Alex knew what he meant. The town had a way of closing ranks when it came to outsiders. He nodded in agreement, his mind already racing ahead. He had a feeling that the answers they sought were buried deep within the town's tight-knit community, and it would take someone with a fresh perspective to uncover them. Olivia Carter, the investigative journalist who'd arrived in Hemlock just days ago, came to mind. She had the tenacity and the lack of bias needed to dig into the town's dark underbelly. Plus, she was already asking questions that had the locals on edge. As the sheriff radioed for backup, Alex took one last look at the woman in the snow. He made a silent promise to her, a vow to find the truth and bring her justice. And with that, he turned and trudged back towards the town, the crunch of his boots the only sound in the muffled silence. The walk gave him time to think. The town had changed in the years since he'd left the force. New faces, new stories. But the mountain air was the same, heavy with secrets and the scent of pine. The tension was palpable, a living, breathing thing that clung to every shadow. The town square was deserted, the usual hustle and bustle muted by the thick blanket of snow. The lights in the windows looked like lonely beacons in the gloom. He knew where he had to go next, the local tavern, where whispers often grew louder than the roar of the fireplace. He pushed open the heavy door, the warmth of the room washing over him like a balm. The conversations inside hushed for a moment before resuming, the buzz of curiosity and fear underlying every word. He scanned the faces, looking for someone who might have seen something, anyone who could help him piece together the puzzle. And there she was, in the corner booth, a laptop open in front of her. Olivia looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was something in her gaze that told him she knew more than she was letting on. He approached, feeling the weight of the room shift, the whispers swirling around them like a storm gathering. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned back in her seat, assessing him. "What makes you think I know anything, Mr. Turner?" Alex leaned in, his breath fogging the cold glass of the window beside her. "Because," he said, "I have a feeling we're both looking for the same answers." The room held its breath as they stared at each other, the tension crackling like the fire behind them. And then, she nodded, ever so slightly. It was a start, a thread of connection in the vast tapestry of the mystery. Together, they would unravel the secrets of Hemlock. Whether they liked it or not, they were now bound by a shared purpose, to bring the missing women home and to stop the monster that lurked in the shadows. The storm outside grew stronger, the wind howling like a mournful cry. Inside the tavern, the whispers grew louder, the eyes more suspicious. But Alex and Olivia remained steadfast, their determination a beacon in the gathering darkness. They had no idea what they were up against, but they were ready to face it. The hunt was on. Alex knew the town like the back of his hand, the secret pathways and hidden places that had been his playground once upon a time. But it had been years since he'd walked these streets with a purpose other than to outrun his own ghosts. Now, he found himself retracing old steps, looking for clues that had been buried by time and the relentless march of the seasons. Olivia, for her part, had an outsider's perspective. Her sharp mind and dogged curiosity had already uncovered whispers of a dark past that the townspeople had hoped to keep buried. The two of them made an unlikely duo, the damaged detective and the ambitious journalist, driven by different demons but bound by a common quest for truth. Their first stop was the local police station, a squat building that had seen better days. The files they needed were dusty and neglected, but they held the key to the pattern that was slowly beginning to emerge. The missing women all had one thing in common. They had all been outsiders, drawn to the town by the promise of a new life, only to vanish without a trace. It was a story that had played out before, and it was a story that Alex knew too well. The mayor's name kept popping up in their investigation, a charismatic figure who had arrived in Hemlock shortly before the disappearances began. His past was as shrouded in mystery as the town itself, and the more they dug, the more it seemed that he was the linchpin in the whole grisly affair. Alex felt his anger simmering, a volatile mix of his old instincts and the newfound sense of purpose that Olivia had ignited in him. But as they pieced together the puzzle, they realized that the stakes were higher than they'd ever imagined. The town's very existence seemed to hinge on the secrets they were uncovering, secrets that had been carefully preserved by those who wielded power and feared the truth. The night grew darker, the snow piling up outside the station windows. They sat hunched over the files, the warmth of the room a stark contrast to the coldness of the facts they were uncovering. And in that moment, Alex knew that he had to come clean with Olivia. He had to tell her about his past, about the case that had driven him from the force and into the arms of the bottle. With a heavy sigh, he began to speak, the words tumbling out like stones from a damaged dam. He told her of the girl he'd failed to save, the guilt that had eaten away at him, the whiskey that had become his only solace. He told her of the quiet moments of doubt and despair, and the fierce determination that had brought him back to Hemlock. Olivia listened, her eyes never leaving his. There was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding. And when he'd finished, she reached out and placed a hand on his. "We're in this together now," she said, her voice steady. "We'll find them. We'll stop this." And with that, the two of them stood up, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The storm outside had not abated, but in the warmth of their shared resolve, it was as if the walls of the station had grown thicker, the world outside a distant memory. They stepped into the night, the snow crunching underfoot, and set off into the heart of the mystery. The town lay silent, a tableau of shadows and light beneath the moonless sky. The mountain loomed over them, a silent sentinel that had borne witness to countless secrets. As they moved through the deserted streets, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential clue. Their first break came in the form of a shivering young woman, stumbling out of the woods at the edge of town. She was barely coherent, her eyes wide with terror, but she managed to whisper something before collapsing into Alex's arms. "The mayor." The chase was on. They had to move quickly, before the mayor could silence her or anyone else who knew too much. The snow had become a weapon, obscuring their path and muffling their footsteps. But they pushed on, driven by a force greater than the cold that bit at their skin and the fear that gnawed at their hearts. As they approached the mayor's mansion, the lights were blazing, casting a garish glow onto the freshly fallen snow. The grandeur of the place seemed almost obscene against the backdrop of the horrors they were uncovering. Alex's grip tightened on his gun, the weight of it a grim reminder of the task ahead. Olivia's eyes searched the windows, looking for any sign of movement, any clue to what was happening inside. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch in the woods. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. They circled the building, looking for a way in. The doors were locked, the windows barred. It was a fortress, designed to keep secrets in and the outside world out. But there was always a way in, Alex knew, if you were willing to look hard enough. They found it in the form of a cellar door, half buried in the drift. It was heavy, but with a grunt of effort, Alex managed to push it open. The scent of earth and decay wafted out, a prelude to the horrors that awaited them below. They descended the stairs, the darkness swallowing them whole. In the dim light, they saw rows of cages, filled with the shivering forms of the missing women. Their eyes were dull with despair, their faces bruised and dirty. The sight was almost too much to bear, but Alex's anger was a fire that burned away his fear. He moved through the room, unlocking the cages one by one, whispering reassurances that he hoped were true. Olivia hovered by the door, her hand on her recorder, ready to capture the truth when it came. And it did, in the form of the mayor himself, emerging from the shadows, a gun in his hand. His smile was cold, his eyes like chips of ice. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a sibilant hiss. Alex stepped in front of Olivia, his own weapon raised. "You're going to tell us everything," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Everything." The mayor's smile grew wider. "And why would I do that?" "Because," Alex replied, his eyes never leaving the man's, "the game is over." The standoff was a dance of shadows and tension, the air thick with the promise of violence. And then, with a suddenness that took Alex's breath away, the mayor fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the room in a stark, blinding light. Alex felt a searing pain in his shoulder, the impact spinning him around. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. Through the haze of pain, he saw Olivia dive for cover, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The mayor took a step towards them, his gun still smoking. Alex's mind raced, his training kicking in. He couldn't let this monster win, not now, not when they were so close. He took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and pushed himself back to his feet. The room swam around him, but he focused on the target, his hand steadying despite the blood that trickled down his arm. He took the shot, the world seeming to slow down to a crawl. The bullet hit the mayor in the chest, sending him staggering back, his gun clattering to the floor. The silence that followed was absolute, the only sound the echo of the gunshot bouncing off the stone walls. Olivia rushed to his side, her eyes scanning him for other injuries. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alex nodded, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Let's get these women out of here," he said, his voice strained. "And then we tell their story to the world." The mayor lay on the ground, his life ebbing away, a look of disbelief on his face. The secrets of Hemlock were no longer his to keep. The town's dark heart had been exposed, and there would be no going back. Together, Olivia and Alex helped the freed women up the stairs and into the cold night air. The snow was falling harder now, a cleansing shroud that seemed to whisper of new beginnings. As they stumbled through the drifts, the town was waking up to the horror in its midst. The sirens grew louder, a cacophony that pierced the quiet. Quinn was the first to arrive, his cruiser's lights painting the night in red and blue. He took one look at Alex, his face pale in the strobing glow, and rushed over. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded, his voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Alex, his shoulder throbbing, nodded towards the mayor's house. "It's all in there," he said, his voice tight with pain. "The truth of this town. And it's not pretty." The sheriff's eyes searched Alex's, looking for the lie, the excuse. But all he found was a weary resolve. He nodded, then turned to the women, wrapping them in blankets from the cruiser's trunk. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice gentle. "Let's get you out of the cold." Olivia hovered nearby, her recorder capturing every word, every moment. She knew the story she had was explosive, the kind that could change lives, ruin careers. But she also knew the price of the truth. It was a weight she wasn't sure she could bear alone. As the paramedics arrived and the chaos grew around them, she took Alex's hand, her eyes searching his. "We did it," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We found them." Alex managed a wan smile, his eyes distant. "Yeah," he said. "We did." The days that followed were a blur of interviews, paperwork, and a town coming to terms with its own monsters. The mayor's secret life unraveled, revealing a tapestry of lies and deceit that had ensnared the whole community. The townspeople were torn between relief and anger, grief and betrayal. But amidst the turmoil, there was also a sense of release. The fear that had held Hemlock in its icy grip had begun to thaw, revealing the cracks in its foundation. The truth had set them free, but it had also left them with the daunting task of rebuilding. Alex and Olivia found themselves at the center of it all, their unlikely partnership forged into something stronger. They had brought the light into the darkest corners of the town, but now they had to decide if they could live with the shadows it had cast on their own lives. The night after the mess of the mayor's house, they sat in the quiet of Alex's cabin, the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. The whiskey bottle sat untouched between them, a symbol of the past they'd left behind. Olivia looked at him, her eyes filled with a newfound respect. "What now?" she asked. Alex stared into the flames, the ghosts of his past dancing in the embers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm not running from anything." And in that moment, as the snow fell outside, they both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. For in the frozen heart of the mountain town, they had found not just the truth, but a reason to keep fighting. The story of Hemlock's hidden horrors had only just begun to unfold, and as the first light of dawn pierced the gloom, they knew there would be more battles to fight, more secrets to uncover. But as they sat in the warmth of the cabin, surrounded by the whispers of the night, they had a semblance of peace. They had each other, and the unshakable belief that justice would prevail. The storm had passed, but the town was forever changed. And as the sun rose over the mountains, casting a new light on the snow-covered streets, They stepped into the day, ready to face whatever the world had in store for them. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing to stay updated with our latest stories. Give us a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts.